G'day, Shirtloads of Science, University of Sydney. Dr. Carl here with Professor Heather Ford to tell us about the things that I love to pieces called encyclopedias. Are you a big fan, I'm guessing, of encyclopedias?
Yes, I'm a big fan. I remember in the old days, living in South Africa, my mother used to buy me an encyclopedia every month. They used to come out in the CNA, version 1, version 2, version 3. It was great.
And you've written an article about it here for the conversation, saying we, that's you, analysed 35,000 Wikipedia, I love Wikipedia, entries about Australian places. Some of them sanitise history. And you mentioned something happened in Katoomba with regard to something not being mentioned in Wikipedia, which I love to pieces.
Yes, in Katoomba, the postdoc on the project, Francesca Sidoti, actually lives in Katoomba. And she did some interviews with editors. And she was really surprised when she saw that the forced removal of Indigenous people in Katoomba wasn't even mentioned in the article. And I think that's because people really write about places on Wikipedia that they care about in some ways. And in a lot of ways, they're trying to encourage people to visit. They're writing because of their love of a place. And so when they write about it, they tend to not include the bad bits.
So in your article here, you say that Wikipedia articles related to Australia are overwhelmingly centred on cities. You've got 87% of the population living in the 8 festering sores that we call cities. And in Australia, you've got 40% of the country counts as desert under the definition of less than 200 millimetres of rain a year, and 40% is too dry to grow anything on, so it kind of makes sense. But I love encyclopedias. Like, I've been writing stories for ages, and I used to look up Encyclopedia Britannica, and they stopped doing them, so I just shifted over entirely to Wikipedia. I've loved Wikipedia right from the beginning. How come, how come people have been saying bad things about Wikipedia right from the beginning?
Well, I love Wikipedia too, and some people might say that I'm saying bad things about it by pointing out that it has weaknesses. But I think this is the reason why I do my work, because I love Wikipedia, but I want people to be able to come to Wikipedia really understanding what Wikipedia does well and what it doesn't do well. Because the problem is that a lot of people come to Wikipedia and they think that this encyclopedia is edited by anyone. Anyone can edit it. And so there's somehow an idea that everyone's biases will iron each other's out, right? Like, eventually we'll get to this neutral point of view, which is what Wikipedia aims to achieve. But no source is completely unbiased. No source is neutral. And so it's about trying to figure out how this source is biased. Where is it better? Where does it do better than in other places? Actually, weirdly, I've looked at Wikipedia since the very early days, early 2000s, and the criticism of Wikipedia has actually changed a lot over time.
So tell me more.
So in the early days, people were shocked that you could have volunteers who were not experts editing the encyclopedia. And so that was the radical position that Wikipedia took. But actually, historians have said that volunteers have often created encyclopedias or reference books or almanacs. So that's actually not where Wikipedia is radical. I think where Wikipedia is pretty radical is that it edits an encyclopedia, it creates an encyclopedia every minute of the day. Every second something happens, you can write an article about it. And that's where things get really interesting, because in the era of history, something only really becomes historic after the fact. But Wikipedians are writing about historic events as they happen. As they happen. So when I studied the Egyptian Revolution article, for example, the article about the Egyptian Revolution was drafted the day before the first protests happened. The day before the first protest happened. Now that is radical.
So somebody was planning it, and they had it ready, and all I had to do was hit the post button. So what year was that? Is that the spring?
2011.
Spring Revolution.
Yes, January.
Wow.
Yes.
Because, like, I write all sorts of stuff, and I know very little about anything. So I'd always go automatically to Encyclopedia Britannica to get an overview. And now I go to Wikipedia. But the best thing about it for me are the references. And they're just gorgeous. And then they take you down the rabbit hole of knowledge. And I do remember some various radio broadcasters say, you can't trust Wikipedia. And this was after an article had been written in Nature comparing Encyclopedia Britannica to Wikipedia, saying that Wikipedia actually had fewer mistakes. Is my memory correct on that?
Is your memory correct? Now I'm testing my memory. I think Wikipedia had a similar number of errors to Encyclopedia Britannica. Yes. The weird thing about that Nature article, it became very controversial.
Ooh.
One of the reasons it became controversial was that the articles that were chosen were really Eurocentric, right? So they were about topics, scientists from European, who were very popular and famous in European history, very kind of popular topics. It didn't look across this broad swathe of knowledge that Wikipedia or even Britannica covered. And so people said, well, why did you choose those articles in particular? Why didn't you choose a random sample, for example? So the methodology really was quite flawed. And I know that Britannica wrote a very stern letter.
Oh,
yes.
A stern letter.
A very stern letter. I'm sure they criticized other things. I can't remember what else, but yes. I think that it's really true that in many areas, Wikipedia is really accurate, it's really up to date, and its references are excellent. That is probably without a doubt, and there's probably consensus about that. I think where things get a bit blurry is trying to understand where Wikipedia is not so good.
Right. So you've given us a bit of a summary here. Tell us more about where Wikipedia is not so good, or should we ask you about how you end up actually being able to write this article for the conversation? And in fact, we haven't even asked you what your line of work is and how you got there. Let's do that first, and then we'll come back, I'm writing it down, to Wiki Not So Good. Okay, so what was the pathway you took, which might be an inspiration for other people, to end up being able to talk about Wikipedia and other things of knowledge?
So I was born in South Africa, and I graduated at the end of apartheid. And I started working for nonprofits and came into contact with the free and open source software movement. And so when I was working in South Africa, I co-founded Creative Commons South Africa. I was a card-carrying member of the Wikimedia movement.
Wow.
I was super excited. I hosted with others the first editathon in the continent of Africa.
Editathon?
An editathon is where Wikipedia editors get together and edit about a topic that they think is not very well represented on the encyclopedia. So even at this institution that we're sitting in today, there have been editathons, often to write articles about women, because you may know that only about 19% of English Wikipedia biographies are about women.
What? 1/5?
Yes.
Wow.
So people will try and add articles or improve articles about women, for example. So yes, that was in the early 2000s. But then in about 2005, I started to doubt whether free and open source software and open content was the only answer to the problems that we were facing in the global majority countries, like in South Africa. And so I went back to study. And then I've been writing about Wikipedia as a social scientist ever since. And I wrote a book about Wikipedia and the writing of the Egyptian Revolution.
What was the name of the book that you wrote?
It's called Writing the Revolution, Wikipedia and the Survival of Facts in the Digital Age. And then the Australian Research Council gave me and other colleagues, including Tamsin Peach, and Michael Falk and Francesca Sidoti, some money to do a national 3-year study on Wikipedia in Australia, which is very exciting because Wikipedia doesn't tend to be examined in the national context.
So you say you received a grant to examine Wikipedia in the national context. Can you explain that to me? What does that mean exactly?
Sure. So usually when people study Wikipedia and what Wikipedia includes and what it doesn't include, they usually look at a global level. So they say, how many biographies of women are there on English Wikipedia? And they'll calculate it. But what we were really interested in is, what does Wikipedia look like in a national context? In Australia, for example. What does English Wikipedia do well when it represents Australia, Australian people, places, and events? And what is more weakly represented? And what kinds of forces are at play in influencing this representation?
And so this conversation article is a summary of that.
That's a summary of the second stage of our project. So in the first year, we studied how Wikipedia represents Australian people. In the second year, Australian places. And we're just about to start Australian events.
So we're now in mid-2025-ish. So how long do you think this will take to finish?
The project finishes mid-2026.
Right.
And so the way we do it is we collect up all the articles in English Wikipedia. Now, there are millions of articles in English Wikipedia.
By English, you mean from England or the United Kingdom or English language?
So there are more than 300 language versions of Wikipedia.
300 languages?
Yes.
And there's only 200 countries on Earth or so, roughly. Wow.
Yes. But in my home country, South Africa, there are 11 official languages. So you can imagine in countries there are multiple languages. And so we have more than 300 language versions. So we are looking at English Wikipedia, and we are trying to understand, of all these articles in English Wikipedia, which ones represent Australia. Now, that is a very complicated task, actually, because Australia, actually, as a nation, is a new concept, right?
Sure.
So what we're trying to do is gather up categories or lists of articles in particular categories related to people, places, and events. And then we start to flesh out these quantitative studies.
So you say here that the articles are overwhelmingly centered on the cities. And you also point out that negative aspects of places are sometimes sanitized, and avoiding mention of discriminatory Australian government policies or violence against First Nations people. There's a lot of that.
Yes, there is. And often when the removal of Indigenous people, for example, is mentioned, the subject of the sentence is not mentioned. So there will be many sentences, for example, that we noticed where it stated that the Indigenous population saw a rapid decline from a certain period, but it doesn't say what caused that decline, right? You know, forced removal, murder by colonizers, for example. So there's some really interesting language that gets used in these articles about places.
What happens is there, you use the term edit war. Is there an edit war? And can you define for me what is an edit war? And they have edit wars about the spelling of yogurt and the Bee Gees?
Yes.
And more serious things about people's lives and deaths.
Exactly.
So what is an edit war?
An edit war is when editors revert one another's edits. So if you, Carl, had to go onto Wikipedia right now and make a change that was wrong, if it was watched by enough people, someone or a bot, because that's usually how vandalism gets removed, your edit would be reverted. It's called a revert. And all that means is that the edit that you made to change the article goes back in history, and the edit before is reinstated.
And you say this is done by bots?
Yes.
What? Not humans?
Wikipedia has perfected the use of automated machines to do editing work and maintenance work on the encyclopedia for a very long time. So what will happen is when someone edits an article with a vandalistic edit, what will happen is a bot will be analyzing that edit according to a number of different factors. And they're looking up words and they're looking up anonymity and, lots of different factors. And they will sometimes revert automatically.
What happens if the human goes back and disagrees with the bot? And can you have this going backwards and forwards?
That's an edit war. Well, an edit war is when multiple reversions happen sequentially. Okay, so usually it's two editors who disagree with one another. So one person will make an edit, the other one will revert that edit, they'll make another edit, they'll revert it. If this happens sequentially enough times, that's called an edit war. And then what might happen is the page gets locked.
Oh.
So there are many pages on Wikipedia that are actually locked. And they're either locked for registered editors. So if you're an anonymous editor and you just went in without logging in, for example, you may not be able to edit it. Or if you haven't had more than a certain number of edits to your name, you may not be able to edit it. Some articles around the Middle East, Jerusalem, Palestine, Israel, for example, those have the highest level of locking, I guess, where only a select number of editors are able to make edits, and editors are only allowed to discuss on the talk page what they must do, what they want to change in the article.
Wow. And you say they've had edit wars over the spelling of yogurt, that creamy, milky confection?
Yes, hummus. There's a lot, actually. If you think about culture generally, there is just so much that people disagree heavily with. Where hummus was started, for example, hummus is a big one. When I was studying Wikipedia in the Middle East, it became a really contentious article. Closer to home, pavlova is very contentious. Where pavlova came from.
Oh, New Zealand or Australia.
Exactly. And we are not going to say which.
So that edit war is still going on?
I'm not sure, actually, but I know that it's very contentious.
Now, I remember at one stage, I foolishly encouraged people on Triple J to go ahead and just do some random edits on Wikipedia. And very quickly, it turned out that I'd been kidnapped by gypsies at an early age, raised in a circus, and brought up being trained as a lion tamer and an obstetrician and gynecologist by the time I was 12 years old. So they got reverted out pretty quickly.
Did they?
Yeah, they just vanished like the summer breeze. Now, look, we've got a lot to discuss here. So can we bring you back for part 2?
Sure.
And before we go into part 2, can just tell people how they can find you and follow you in your fine work?
They can follow me on my website, hblog.org, or on LinkedIn.
So letter H,
Yeah.
BLOG,
Yeah. .org.
.org. That's it.
Yes.
Wow, you've got a very short name there. That's perfect.
From the old days, I was one of the old bloggers.
Fantastic. Look, thank you very much, Professor Heather, and we'll catch you on the other side.
Thanks, Carl.
Shirtloads of Science is washed, spun and aired by the University of Sydney.